Conference, the daily noon briefing with Stefan will start promptly. The President of the General Assembly will make a few remarks and then we'll open the floor to questions. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think indeed, ladies and gentlemen of the press and colleagues, it's certainly an honor for me to meet with you today to interact on a number of issues affecting all of us as members of the United Nations, even if we do so virtually. You will recall that one of the very first things we started the presidency with was the very important political declaration on health coverage and its importance, and the wisdom of that declaration, I think, is clear for all of us to see. It was led by Japan and with full support of all the membership. Now, COVID-19 pandemic has, if anyone doubted, indicated the necessity for us to work together closely to deal with global problems, be it in health, in transportation, in education, in energy, in climate issues, on a host of issues. And since the pandemic, life has never been the same for individuals, for communities, and for nations, certainly not for the United Nations. And work had to change in terms of the tempo, but not only the tempo, in terms also of the method of work. But work had to continue for the United Nations, and this was extremely challenging that we are meeting virtually in this hall at the United Nations headquarters in New York with colleagues around the world, especially in Geneva, but also in New York, who are unable to join us in this very important room, indicate the necessity to work together to defeat COVID-19, to also strengthen multilateral cooperation on all matters affecting us as a global community. With the difficulty to work in person, following medical advice globally, the Assembly had to find means to work within the constraints as they are. And to do so, we had to have a decision, 74/544, which allows us to basically take decisions and make resolutions via a silence procedure without normal plenary meetings. It's very important that member states agreed to this, and that allowed us to take important timely decisions and resolutions, 26 so far from the 27th of March. Now, it also put a lot of focus on us to work harder at consensus, because it is very difficult ordinarily to do negotiations. But if we have to move on to get things done, we needed this resolution and this decision, which decision was extended, and that allowed us to have the 26 resolutions and decisions we have so far taken. COVID-19 forced all of us to work differently as we negotiate not the current moment, but we are forced to reflect deeper as to what will happen post-COVID because of the devastation which COVID has brought to social and economic life. This is really why the initiatives taken by member states to have decisions and to have resolutions to guide us post-COVID and also to guide us in going through the current moment, I think, are extremely important, and member states and the Secretariat need to be commended for this leadership. Now, as you know, 2020 is a very critical year for the United Nations. We know we are geared to celebrate the 75th anniversary of our organization. Serious work is going on as to how to have a very robust, forward-looking political declaration to be placed before our heads of state and government on the 21st of September this year as a declaration. Extremely important work is going on this matter, and we are confident that a very important political declaration will be agreed to by all member states. You also know that this 75th year is also coinciding with the 25th year of Beijing, a very important process for the world in terms of inclusion, in terms of gender equality. And we are also celebrating this at the same time we are dealing with what we call the super year of nature. Many processes and mandates relating to diversity in the biological world, the whole concern of oceans and stuff related to degradation. These are, again, processes, some of which are being scaled down because of the necessity to observe social distancing. But those that can continue are continuing, and they have continued with virtual meetings. And you have seen virtual meetings have shown what technology can do to get us to solve problems. But it also has shown that technology is not evenly distributed, and it is far easier for some countries to deal with continuity in education than other countries. And this again speaks to the necessity to find means of mutual support, especially for countries that need support in technology to continue to provide for education of children. A lot of countries are able to provide some form of education through virtual means. It's not the case with many countries in the developing world. And I think this again shows why we need to collaborate further in education, in technology, and in all areas of life, in addition to the issues relating to the environment and to other elements that are important for the United Nations. And recalling that the global community has made 2030 an important milestone to achieve the SDGs. And we have entered into the decade of action to deliver on the SDGs. Even before then, we were worried that financing gaps and other encumbrances will make it impossible for many countries to achieve the SDGs in a substantial manner. And now we are hit with COVID-19. It means we should do even more in the areas of cooperation, sharing of information and ideas, and mutual support to guarantee that we are able to achieve SDGs in this 75th year of our organization. I would like to conclude by saying that the General Assembly, as with other organs of the United Nations, is committed to continuing to serve the people and to do everything possible, even under current difficulties, to see that there is business continuity substantially at the United Nations and with UN staff and member states. And this is our undertaking. I would like to conclude by thanking media organizations for their interest in the work that we do at the United Nations. And of course, member states are at the forefront of pushing that we continue to serve the people on this very important platform. I think I will stop here, and I welcome questions relating to the work we do as an assembly and by extension at the United Nations. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. President. And we have questions. We'll start with Edie.
Mr. President, thank you so much for doing this briefing on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. And as everyone has been saying today, UNCA certainly expresses our deepest sympathies to the families and loved ones and friends of all those who have been lost by COVID-19. As you yourself said, the pandemic has caused tremendous changes in the way the United Nations is operating. And the biggest change, I am certain, is going to be in the general debate, because the proposals that you've been putting forward, which haven't finally been decided yet, are certainly for a much more scaled back operation. Being that this is the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, my question is, do you envision that the big celebration that was expected to mark this very significant anniversary could be pushed back until next year, so that there still would be a major commemoration of this milestone for the United Nations? And when do you expect to have a final decision on how the general debate in September will be handled? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think two questions. One is the issue of how do we celebrate the 75th anniversary, whether we should, in light of what you think should happen, push it further. The conversation here at the United Nations and with the member states and with all concerned is that we do not know how long things will take to achieve the normality that will allow in-person meetings. But we cannot hold off such an important celebration, because it is an important moment for all of us. And facing challenges is one of the things the UN should do. And then how do we then face this challenge? We face it with creativity and innovation. And on the 26th of June, we'll celebrate properly, given the rules that are in place, the Charter Day. And we will have something to start the conversation concerning the importance of the Charter. And the political declaration is being negotiated, it's being looked at, and the celebration of the 75th anniversary is not conceived as one moment. It's conceived as some activity that can proceed throughout the year, and because it's not a moment, and that's why we should not say we wait until this. This is the conversation this far, and therefore shifting it to another day is simply shifting uncertainty. So the best way is to make it as normal as we can make it, and this is the thinking in the House. The next issue you raised is the general debate. Again, with the general debate, it is the same thinking. What we have is what we have, and we deal with it as it is. We evolve means of getting heads of state and government to talk about important issues as they see them, as they affect us as a global community. In-person meetings are highly unlikely in the coming months. And given the uncertainty, again, the best way is to see how we get meetings, avoiding full in-person meetings. By September, it is possible that the numbers of people that can be allowed into the hall will allow some, maybe 100 or so, but not a whole lot of people coming to New York or coming to the General Assembly. Be that as it may, the importance of the moment in terms of debate as to how to get heads of state to make their statements and how people will understand what they are saying. I think, again, these are things that we are discussing, and you are the point at the time. We have had many conversations around this subject, as you well know, and I'm confident in the next, maybe I'm guessing the next 2 weeks, the mechanics of how this is to be done, but as to the broad direction is clear. We want to have the general debate as scheduled, but we cannot have them in person as we used to as had happened in the last 74 years. But it will happen. And as to the mechanics, I think this is what we are, quote unquote, loosely negotiating, because people are committed to have the general debate. It has meaning for our organization, and it has also meaning that we will continue to work under whatever circumstances are placed before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have on the list, the chat, around 7 questions. So we'll go to Majid.
Thank you very much, Mr. President of General Assembly. My question is a follow-up to Edie's question. You mentioned, and I just want to make sure first I understand you correctly, that you said in the next 2 weeks we will decide the mechanic of it. My question is about whether the world leader is going to be physically present at the United Nations, or they will make their speech via video conference or some through the video conference, and they will have some their delegations present in the General Assembly hall. Have you made a decision, any decision about that? Thank you.
I think I'm restating what I've stated. World leaders cannot come to New York because they cannot come as single individuals. A president doesn't travel alone, and we don't expect, therefore, to have presidents here. They might have to have hotels. What are the nature of hotels at that time? Stuff like that. And we do not know what the medical advice will be for the country and for the city. Host government is very important in terms of what is possible. So I think what we have said is that it is my hope that within 2 weeks we'll have clarity as to the mechanics. But in terms of the broad direction, we are not going to have heads of state and government come into New York because it is impossible at this stage to think that this is possible in September. And we do not want to also shift it any further. But then the mechanics of how delegations that cannot come to New York because they cannot come to New York will make their presentations are what we are now trying to really choreograph. This is really the way it is. And a decision is a decision made in consultation with a host of stakeholders, including the host country, the host city, the secretariat, and it is a decision to be made by member states, which is why the OPGA, my office, is key in this, but it's not an issue just of one element. These are the elements we have to look at together. And this is why I cannot tell you it will happen within 10 days. But my projection is that I hope within 2 weeks, this mechanics will also be clear. But as to the direction, it's clear there are no in-person meetings to hold for the general debate. Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Abdel Hamid.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Abdel Hamid Sayan from the Arabic Daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I'm so happy to see you here today. We have been requesting this press conference for some time. And I would like to ask something in general about the role of the General Assembly in peace and security, and I want to take you back to the issue of Palestine. I mean, the GA was from the very beginning was following this issue in Resolution 181 on 29th November 1947, all the way to the first resolution last December. Resolution 3236 was adopted the 22nd of November 1974. It talks about the rights of the Palestinians. What are these rights? It talks about their right for self-determination, their right to have their own representation. And point 5, it talks about their right to regain their rights by all means. That's what the General Assembly wrote. Do you still believe in those rights? And the Palestinians do have these rights, and the GA should follow up with those and has a moral commitment to see these rights implemented as we come into July 1st, where the Israelis are promising or they're pledging that they will annex almost 30% of the occupied Palestinian land. What the General Assembly can do to prevent such a disaster? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the question is a clear one as far as the General Assembly is concerned, and as far as I know, as the United Nations is concerned. The General Assembly and the UN more broadly takes the issue in terms of our resolutions, not only recognizing the rights of all human beings, but in the specific case of the Palestinian question, to have a two-state solution. Territorial expansions under the General Assembly are not recognized. States have boundaries. Where they are in dispute, they are settled without force. I think there is no question. There is no two ways about this matter. I think all we can say is simply it is the Assembly's view that negotiations are the means to resolve this matter. And there have been efforts to kickstart discussions so that we do not put fuel into the fire already. And I think this is the approach of the Assembly. The Secretary General has made statements like this. We have made statements like this. As far as the United Nations is concerned, a two-state solution is where we stand. And borders do not change through force. These are issues concerning law. Those who have influence have been reached out to in terms of the necessity to avoid bloodshed, the necessity to give peace a chance. These are the issues that we can do. This is what the General Assembly has been about. And I think we want to see a two-state solution implemented, and we obviously would not want anything that has to do with force or violence. I think there's no question about this. There are difficulties around this, and that's why efforts are being done to get the quartet and others to begin to push for thorough discussions concerning the subject. I think this is all I want to do to restate what was stated before. Thank you.
Philippe?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Good morning, Mr. President. My question is about the 17th of June. Do you expect more than one day for the election on the 17th of June due to the new procedure? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we are having a mechanism to allow for voting even if we have to go multiple rounds. But in the understanding in terms of decisions so far made, our framework is within 24 hours. Another ballot is required, which we arrange for this to happen. This all we can do because we have to obey rules relating to social distancing to make sure that we vote within the context of the rules that will protect the safety of all school staff as well as member states. I think that's why it is likely that we cannot have immediately when we know that there's a second round required or a third round, subsequently, we have to be given 24-hour spaces. Yes, on the 17th of June, there will be elections for the PGA of the 25th session. There will be election for non-permanent members of Security Council. There will be elections for members of the Economic and Social Council, 26 in all. Thank you.
And we have a question from Pamela. Go ahead.
Trying to unmute. Mr. President, thank you for the briefing. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. My question is, both in your national capacity and as President of the General Assembly, do you have any comment on the protests around the world on Black Lives Matter? Thank you.
Well, I don't speak on national capacity as PGA, and therefore, what I will say is this, that the United Nations is very clear about the importance of rights and the importance of resolution of disputes through non-approaches. And the United Nations is clear as to how racism in any guise is contrary to the ethos not only of the organization but the charter itself. I think nothing is more clear than that the United Nations, more than any organization, has made the issue of rights and dignity of human persons the central element of its work. And today, if you cut through all the long discussion, the United Nations says it is based on 3 pillars: peace and security, human rights, and development. It also says that neither element stands alone. They are mutually supportive. And the United Nations has mechanisms within its own organization and outside against racism or violence. And I think these are the issues. The UN is very clear as to why these are important. And recall, neither whether you're talking about the Charter itself or you're talking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the contribution of individuals from all parts of the world as to why these are important norms. And I think there is no question that these are important for the United Nations.
Around 3
Thank
more.
you.
Thank you. We have around 3 more questions. We'll go to Iftikhar.
Thank you very much for this briefing. I go to another subject about Security Council reform. What is the status of this process, which is an important undertaking of the General Assembly to strengthen the role of the Security Council in resolving disputes, international disputes, some of which are on the agenda of the Security Council for debate for decades?
Well, I think I will avoid talking about what the Security Council internally does. I will just talk in terms of the role of the PGA in relation to the reforms, and to simply say we have a negotiation, an informal negotiation that is on. The IGN is ongoing. It has faced difficulties because many negotiations are tough, and a lot of people prefer tough negotiations conducted in person. And that process itself has long been in the cards. And it is even more difficult at this time. But the facilitators are already consulting, and they will put to us those elements that they have captured in the initial stages where they had the opportunity to have in-person meetings, that is before the middle of of March, which was one in-person meetings in the UN, were not feasible. And negotiations that are virtual are also more difficult than we have been. We have evolved to make them easier than they were, let's say, in March. Now we have platforms to even allow interpretation. There is some difficulty there, but at least we are evolving also in relation to what technologies can support in terms of the processes. As we also evolve the legal instruments to allow for valid meetings as far as the rules of procedure are concerned. So in summary, the intergovernmental negotiations relating to Security Council reform is ongoing. It has been slowed by the current difficulties where in-person meetings are not possible. Thank you.
Now we have Ibtisam. Ibtisam, she has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for the briefing. I have a follow-up regarding the Security Council reform. You talked about difficulties regarding meetings, but could you please elaborate on difficulties regarding content of the reforms, and if there is a time frame where you want to, or you think that the decisions should be made in the near future in this regard. And then my question is regarding the SDGs. And you said that you talked about the fact that there were financial gaps before COVID. Is there now any practical or suggestion on the table regarding how to try to fill these gaps? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the question relating to Security Council reform in terms of timelines is not something that so far we are in the phase of informal negotiations. We do not have really formal processes yet. And this is where the issues are. And I mentioned difficulties in terms of the normal content. I think we have known for 10 years when the intergovernmental negotiations started, relating to how many people, how many countries, relating to powers of membership, relating to whether we can continue with the veto or if it is going to be amended, and if it's amended, how does it, what would it look like? These ones are still issues that are under discussion. So I do not have, as President of 74, the means to give a timeline. But member states are invested in this, and we'll have to wait until the end of the process when a report is given to me and discussed with the membership as to how best to conclude the process, because it's a process started and we are trying to see what has been added from last, and then we can now see, is there a projection that can be made? I think this is where we are at. The issue of SDGs, I think SDGs financing issues in terms of commitments have not been really very good in terms of the issues. But the question, then what happens with what we knew before plus the current difficulties with COVID? I think the World Bank, as well as IMF, as well as even private companies, have given some commitments to support. Some countries that are able to support have also given not only bilateral support, but also created pools of funds to give support to countries. Obviously, even with this, we have small island developing states facing even more dire situation than many others. Landlocked developing countries also have other challenges. There are countries in special needs that conversations at the UN are around giving priority to their needs, because there is real difficulty of slipping further behind, and this is something that is contrary to our commitment. I think more and more I sense more readiness to listen to the needs of others than, let's say, 5 months ago, because really people are struggling, countries are struggling, and you have heard different countries in need talking about debt forgiveness or debt standstill, whatever concepts are used, because many countries think that their debt situation will be even deepening, when in fact they are supposed to do more within the next decade, and this is a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question on the chat from Xinhua, Mr. Wang. He's saying, Mr. President, could you please comment on Mr. Volkan Bozkır's priorities for the 75th session of the General Assembly, especially his focus on the rules-based international system?
I think it's difficult for me to comment on his priorities. I think he will have a chance, once he's formally elected, to interact with all of us. He has done an interaction with the member states, and when elected, he will have an opportunity to elaborate on his priorities and how he intends to work with all of us to achieve them. For now, I think we just wait for a few weeks to have a PGA elect who will then interact with all of us, and we are, as OPG 74, very eager to give support to the 75th president when he's elected. Yeah, thank you.
And the last question goes to Gloria.
I'm so honored. Mr. President, I've followed your career for several years, and I know how you've been carrying the torch for Africa, particularly the Chad region, for many years now. My question is, are you able now, as President of the General Assembly and as an ambassador of one of the most powerful countries in Africa, are you able to start a momentum now to carry on in the future when you're no longer President of the General Assembly, and during the General Assembly to give it impetus? Thank you.
Well, again, I am unable to speak as a Nigerian PR, but what I will say is this, that the United Nations has shown, and so has the EU and other bodies, have shown real interest in giving support to the lectured region. And lately, there is also another support being needed in the Sahel region, and fundamentally dealing with issues connected to countering terrorism, but also doing so in the context of climate change. I think the lectured region is an important region for the United Nations, which meant for the first time in several years, or as far as I can recall, having the entire council under the presidency of Britain at the time to visit the region and interact with leaderships there. And obviously, in my view, another visit is needed to listen to leadership in the region, but also to see for themselves as a council how people affected by the conflict are surviving. The lecture region is a very important one for the continent, but is also an area wherein we have, my dear friend, we have an interface between problems of poverty, problems of climate change, and terrorism. And that is why I think the focus for many countries of the region is to see whether support can be found, and the UN has worked with others to really provide some support. I'm confident that we are on the right track on that one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you everyone for joining us. And now I turn the floor to Stefan. Thank you so much.